Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we are back for our latest update of January's transfer window. But to be honest with you guys, I think these are more therapy and welfare check-in sessions right now with regards to the Spurs fan base and where we are currently at. Look, if you're with us for the very, very first time, where have you truly been? We're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we're on Blue Sky too. And I'm joined by a very, very special guest that I've been blessed to have join us over the past 2 to 3 transfer windows where the mood has been up, it's been down, and it's where Tottenham really are, aren't they? It's, as a football club, we are just simply consistently inconsistent. And we all know, look, we're going through a very difficult time right now as supporters. And there's no, I think, day harder as a Spurs fan than coming off the back of a North London derby defeat to Arsenal. But I'm pleased to welcome back to Last Word on Spurs, football reporter, journalist, obviously, of course, really well respected in the football industry. I'm delighted to welcome back Mike McGrath to Last Word on Spurs. Mike, thank you so much for your time. How are you? You must be crazy. Many keep telling me to keep getting you here to talk about Tottenham. What am I doing to you? What is wrong with you? How are you?
Yeah, I'm great, Ricky. Yeah, you book me, or I say book me. You get in touch really early, so you never know what's gonna be happening at that time when you say, "How about January the 16th?" And then obviously they arrange this fixture, and I wasn't to know that this was going to be such a devastating day for the Spurs fan base, which I'm sure the last 24 hours has been a bit of soul searching after that defeat at the Arsenal. So it's my bad luck that I'm speaking to you on this day. But as always, it's great to be here.
Listen, you're very kind, Mike. And look, as we all know, the show must go on with Tottenham. And look, we all know the reality is that it has been a tricky, difficult testing season for supporters. Us all here, we expected more, we wanted better, we deserve better as supporters. And you know what? Normally with a transfer window, that gives you the opportunity to replenish the squad, improve in certain areas. And I know many look at us at the moment, 16, 17 days into a transfer window, feeling that the club should have done more, need to do more. And yeah, there's a lot of questions, I think, around not just the hierarchy, the manager, the players, some of them. I think right now you join us at a time where, Mike, I think there is so many questions with regards to so many mitigating factors at Tottenham, from the very, very top in terms of the ownership. Again, I mentioned to the manager, to the players, to the application, desire and level that we showed in that North London derby. So, look, I'm conscious we've got a lot to get through, and it's an absolute pleasure again to have you join us. So I won't say let the interrogation begin, but we'll open as we mean to go on. You brought up there, of course, North London derby. It'll be wrong of me, as much as I don't want to talk about it, and as much as I want to steer away from it, I thought it would be wrong to not get your opinion on what you made of the game itself. And look, as we know for Tottenham, in terms of that North London derby, we huffed and we puffed in the second half against Arsenal, but quite honestly, never looked like we were going to score. For Arsenal, it's 3 wins in a row against Spurs for the first time since January 1989. Look, I think we can blame injuries a lot as to Spurs' demise right now, but the mentality of a lot of the senior players, I think, Mike, was questioned on the back of that performance, where Spurs' only real leaders that came out of the team itself for that game is in the 18-year-olds of Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall, who, to be honest with you, have emerged as 2 of Spurs' shining lights in these recent weeks. And they really have grabbed their opportunity and shown us what they're capable of. And look, the one thing you can be sure with those 2 is that there's a very bright future for them both. I just really, truly hope that Spurs show them that bright future is going to be with them. And I must also add in Jed Spence to that. I think Jed Spence has also been absolutely remarkable for Tottenham. But outside of those 3 players, it just felt like, Mike, that the senior players in that squad really failed to rise to the occasion of the North London derby. What were your main takeaways, maybe as a neutral from that game? And how do you think we should feel as Spurs fans when you see the application level and desire from some of those I call senior players out there, where we need more, we have to strive for more, given our league position, which we'll come on to very, very shortly.
Well, I think generally, if I was to try and sum it up, I felt it was a bit flat, and that expectation that you spoke about. There's, when you're in teams that are functioning really well and that have a habit of winning, there's an expectation that we're going to get chances to get back into this game. We're going to get chances to win this game. And that I think that's quite a big thing actually with the Spurs team, that you just didn't feel that once they surrendered the lead that they would get back ahead, and when Arsenal scored the second, were they going to actually, were they going to get the equaliser? So I think that is quite alarming, really. That expectation, that the expectation wasn't there. That of course we're gonna get a chance. Of course we're gonna get a big chance for an equaliser. I personally feel that flatness can be freshened up. I think the squad could be freshened up. I think I just saw some of in midfield when Basuma lost misplacing a couple of passes, losing the ball. I just felt, it just struck me that it just needs a little bit of a lift, that team. And I'm not talking about signing £100 million player, but I think maybe they could do with a bit of an injection, really. Maybe that comes from the injured players coming back. But it seems, and I tell you, even the Tamworth game, you just felt during the 90 minutes before they started scoring, it's just a little bit flat, and it just needs a bit of a lift, the whole thing. And that's where Ange Postecoglou comes into it. That's his job. That's his job to get something out of this squad and maybe just change it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up Ange Postecoglou, and as you're acutely aware at the moment, there's a huge amount of pressure it feels on the current Spurs boss. And look, I mean, the stats out there, Mike, as you are, I'm sure, acutely aware in the role that you do, are quite damning at the moment. Spurs have just won one of their past 9 Premier League matches, losing 6 of them. And only Leicester and Southampton have earned fewer points than the 5 taken by Spurs during that run. We've also now lost 11 games in the league in this campaign, which is their joint most at this stage, along with the 97-98, 2003-04, and 08-09 seasons. And you know what? Postecoglou's side, they need to make the most in terms of going into games as well. And when you take into account Spurs have thrown away 18 points from leading positions in the Premier League, only Fulham have lost more with 19. And again, which feels at the moment a real damning indictment of where Tottenham's current form is at, is that when you look at that win against Manchester City away from home, where Spurs on the day were absolutely phenomenal against the champions, if you look at the table projection from then until now, Tottenham would be in the bottom 3, which is crazy to even be sitting here and saying that to you, to be honest with you, in terms of a Tottenham side that have got, some really good players, and will come on to the decimation of injuries for a second time during Ange Postecoglou's reign. Again, I have to say on the injuries, there's a certain narrative that goes around with those injuries as to whether they've been almost forced upon us by the game intensity that Ange trains the players at. But I just want to know where you're at in terms of when we're looking at Spurs' position league-wise at the moment and domestically. What have you made of this season domestically? And do you already feel, Mike, it's the cups or bust for Tottenham?
Well, yeah, there's a huge game at Anfield coming up where Tottenham could be at Wembley with a good performance at Liverpool, and I was there in 2008 when they defeated Chelsea, so I know how much it means to the Tottenham fans to win something, and I was there when Juan de Ramos managed it. So the season itself, I'm not sure. Look, I think there's obviously been an opportunity this season at the top end, which I think Forest have seized. And then to a certain degree, others have kind of flirted with it as well. A bit like when Brighton were on a bit of a roll, Bournemouth are having a fantastic season. So I think there was an opportunity, but I'm still not quite sure that this season was meant to be the one for Spurs to do it. I've always felt, I know Ange Postecoglou talks about the second season, or maybe people who've covered him talk about his second season, but I always felt that this one would be another building one for next season, which is why I think he might get a little bit of time. But it's not been it's not been great when you're at the Etihad like I was, and regardless of how Man City are playing, I just felt that Tottenham's all-round game, they were just absolutely on it, and you feel in a bit like the way Manchester United rise to those big games, Tottenham are a bit like that as well, that they can turn it on like they did at City. They can put in a performance like they did against Liverpool in the Cup. The consistency is almost like going back to the old days. I remember under Harry Redknapp, when there'd be great performances followed by Stoke defeat at White Hart Lane. That kind, what was his name, Kevin Doyle or whoever would have a game of his life, and that's kind of that has been Spurs this season, really inconsistent. And I agree with you. I think the team itself on paper is very good, especially when these injuries come back. That the consistency hasn't been there, which is extremely frustrating, obviously, for the fan base that are listening to this. But I am struggling to see the alternatives, I've got to say, to Ange. And I think he's got a very healthy fixture list in January. I think Everton, I think it's Leicester, is it? Is it Leicester at home as well?
Leicester as well. And obviously that's sandwiched in between the two European, well, I say sandwiched in between. They've got obviously Everton away, which, to be honest with you, I know, like I say, Everton are on a horrendous run of form at the moment. David Moyes just got in there. I just don't think Goodison Park will be as an easy game as maybe some of the neutrals may think it will be for Tottenham, given our current run at the moment. And you've obviously got Hoffenheim in the Europa League, followed by Leicester at home, who are fighting for their lives. And you've got Elfsborg in the, again, final decider of the Europa League. So it does feel like, Mike, to go back on your point there, it was a massive, crucial month for Tottenham before we even hit those cup fixtures to come in February.
I definitely agree with that. I think, look, it's a huge game, Everton, because David Moyes realizes what he's inherited there when they lost to Villa, and he's going to have to do everything he can to get a tune out of, in my opinion, a pretty poor squad. So that's a huge game, and Leicester obviously as well. So I think it just gives them a little bit of time. I can see that it's jam-packed full of games, and obviously the window's extended to February. I can see it being busy right up until that February the 3rd, that Monday that the deadline day is on, because they'll have a game Saturday or Sunday on that weekend. I can see it being really busy, be really exciting that end of the month. And you've got to say you think that Postecoglou could get 6 points out of that. 6 points would really relieve a bit of the pressure on him at the moment, because people are asking, is he the right person for the job? I think without you saying it explicitly, that's kind of what you're asking, isn't it?
I think that's the common question that a lot of Spurs fans will have on their lips. Again, I'll come on to the point. Look, I think when you're looking at the injuries Spurs have had, and I think the one thing Ange has made very, very clear, Mike, and you'll be acutely aware of this as well, that the squad does need help. He's called for that help on a number of occasions, both before the window opening and during the window so far. And look, at the moment, you've got a very jaded Dejan Kulusevski and Dominic Solanke. He has to continue to deploy using 18-year-old central midfielder Archie Gray in defence. He's had to overplay him along with Radu Dragusin, because there's simply nobody else left there in terms of defensive options. You then had that makeshift defensive partnership playing every single game roughly for every 3 to 4 days. And it's any wonder when you look at that why Spurs have struggled for their results. But I just wonder that when you look at Spurs' injury list, and look, we're acutely aware Richarlison is now back. James Maddison is back from suspension, as is Pat Matasar. They're currently awaiting the return of Ben Davies, Christian Romero, Mickey van der Ven, Destiny Udogie, Joel Macario, and Wilson Odobert. Some of them coming back sooner rather than later. How much do you attribute the injuries, Mike, down to Spurs' current form? Because there will be a lot of fans that will throw back that narrative that in the second half of the first season, Ange was here. He got a lot of those players back, if you remember, from the first season of the decimation of injuries, and the form never picked up, and it actually got worse. So I think what fans are kind of seeking for and maybe looking for reassurance on is that there's no guarantee in football. Of course there's not, but how optimistic are you as a journalist looking in from the outside that once he does get those players back, we will definitely see an upturn in results where we didn't see that in the second half of last season?
I agree. I agree with you as well. And what you said also about Ange and the way people train around him and his. I think that has actually, there was a kind of accusation at Celtic that they had a lot of injuries because of this intensity of the way they played. It's obviously a huge injury list that they've had at Spurs. Did Romero and Van der Ven, did they come back a bit too quickly? Is a question as well. And were they? But I do believe that when these players do get back, I think Spurs have a very good team on paper, and maybe it came across wrong the way that and Postecoglou has been. He is. We've seen a kind of confrontational side to him when he's been speaking to BBC reporters this season, or broadcast reporters in particular, and kind of getting a bit. I'd say I don't think it's. I think it's accurate to say he's been a bit shirty with them, to be honest. And when the injuries have been brought up, I agree with him. The injuries have been a huge factor, and like you say, Archie Gray's come through it, and we've seen what a good all-round footballer that he is to play in that position. I think when they do come back, those key players, I think Spurs will, I think you'll see them pick up a lot more points, and it'll be interesting to see where that kind of places them in the market for a centre back as well, because Van der Ven and Romero are just absolutely key players in the way that Ange plays. So I think when they get them back, they fit into his system really well. That's not the problem at all, which is what you might see at Man United, say, where the players don't really suit the system. Who knows what might happen at West Ham when Potter's there. I don't think that's a problem at Spurs. I think that those players are really well suited to Ange's system, but it's just going to be a case of keeping them fit, making sure they come back without any risk that another one would kind of rule them out for long term, which would be really devastating to the season.
Yeah, you actually asked me a second ago explicitly about Ange Postecoglou's future, and obviously the reason why there's a lot of heat right now on the manager is to do obviously with the results. And as you are aware, Mike, being in the industry for such a long time, football is such a results-driven business. And at the moment, Ange, from a points per game perspective, currently is on 1.14, which is the lowest of any Spurs manager at present after 21 games. It's even lower than Christian Gross. Don't know age you, Mike. That was a very, very tricky testing time in amongst the Spurs fan base. And I think that is what is bringing a huge amount of noise around the manager. And then to top it off, obviously, the fact that, there was no shot on target after the second half when Arsenal went 2-1 up, as we touched upon the fact They're currently sitting 13th in the league. It could be 14th by the end of this recording. We're looking at 1 point from 5 in the league, 1 win in 9, 5 points from 27. They're 14 points away from the current top 4, and they're only 8 points off the relegation places. To have to lose 11 of the 21 games so far, it's the joint most ever at a stage this season. I think that is what's concerning a lot of fans. And when they look at the bigger, picture of how many games that we've lost over the course of a big period, 15 of the last 26, you're looking at 24 out of the last 46, 30 points taken from a possible 84. And then when you look at the fact at the moment when they were level on points with Palace, who didn't win a game until October the 27th, actually against Spurs that was. And then it's really hard when you have to take into account, they've had 4 points from a possible 24 against Leicester, Brighton, Palace, Ipswich, Fulham, Bournemouth, Wolves. And I know there's a lot of fans frustrated right now when you think we've lost more games in Palace, Ipswich, Everton, West Ham, and only the bottom 3 at present in Wolves, Leicester and Saints have lost more Premier League matches than Tottenham. How much, when we look at those stats there, do you attribute to the fact that if he had a full squad available to him, I wouldn't be reading you out such damning stats?
Yeah, I think there would be a lot more points on the board for sure. You're talking about managers that have failed at Spurs before as well, and comparing that. I think this season, we could probably all agree Tottenham are not going to get relegated. They're not. You say you're 8 points behind, but look, that's not realistic in my part. They're not in a relegation battle.
You do know, as Spurs fans, we always do think the worst, which is probably half the reason why we are where we are, baby.
But unfortunately, they're also probably not in the fight for Europe either. The way it's going, that is damning. But just being in that mid-table flux is why I just think he'll get a bit more time, a bit more time to try and sort it out. And with a strong end to the season, I always look at the clubs really do look at how even when they've got nothing to play for, how they end the season, whether that's looking good towards the following campaign. And I think he could get, if he gets on a roll. Like I said, I don't think Europe is really realistic with the way they're playing at the moment. Obviously, it's not out of the question, but I think they could get on a bit of a roll for next season, and because I do think this season is a bit of a write-off, really. Besides, obviously, the cup, but in the league, it's a bit of a write-off. It could be one of the glorious seasons if they win at Wembley. So I definitely think these injuries have been a big factor, and having them come back, in February, late January, it'll make a big difference to the feeling around that team, instead of kind of makeshift. Let's get through these games. I think there'll be a bit of a difference about it, and maybe have that expectation that Spurs are going to get something out of these games, which they're going into, rather than kind of hopeful, hoping that'll be all right on the night.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am keen to move away from Ange, and we've got a lot to discuss in terms of where Spurs are in the transfer market right now. But it'd be amiss for me to ask you, from a man that spent a lot of time around football, and you've seen a lot of different managers, the way they deploy tactics and the way they set up games. I just wonder, from your perspective, that I think, granted, look, 100%, the injuries have played a huge, huge factor into the reason why our domestic season has derailed. Do you still feel that he's getting the absolute most, Mike, out of the group of players that are available? And the reason why I ask you that is that it does feel that at Tottenham, with the way the club operates in the transfer window and the tools, and dare I say the limited tools that managers seem to get at Tottenham, you're almost having to kind of work with one hand tied behind your shoulder. So to have any relative success at Tottenham, whatever relative success is these days, if it's a top 4 finish, if it's getting to the latter ends of cup competitions now, it just feels that you've got to get the absolute maximum out of the squad. And I think what worries me is that what we hear from Ange a lot in the post-match defeats is that he's questioning a lot about the mentality of the players. And I would understand that if we're only 3-4 months into his reign, but we're actually 17, 18, 19 months into his reign, and he's still questioning that mentality. I know there has been a turnover in terms of the squad. They brought a lot of, new players in, but do you feel he's still getting the most out of that squad and they are still believing in his methods when we discuss where we are in terms of those stats? And granted, there's a lot of injuries. You think he's got enough players on side there believing in him? Because we understand from what we are led to believe that he does retain the full backing of those within the club. And there's an understanding of what he's battling right now in terms of the injuries. And there doesn't seem to be any pressure being applied to his position right now, but almost trying to put the structure in place around him to make this better for the future. Is that how you read the situation at the moment when it comes to Daniel Levy's patience on this?
Yeah, there's nothing to say. There's been, we're all asking questions ourselves, people around the club or around football, whether there might be a sacking, and I'm not hearing that there's anything imminent myself. So I can see him, being in there for the next games. And you asked, like, what does tip a manager over the edge in terms of being sacked? Just in Spurs, if I just recall just myself, I remember a huge defeat for AVB. I think it was a 5-0. They lost.
Liverpool at home. Yeah, Liverpool at home.
Right, the players are not with him when they fell apart that way. I think with I think there was was it Harry Redknapp? There was a big Udinese. There was a bit of lack of discipline. David Bentley might have got a red card, or it might have been the manager before him. But anyway, I remember a defeat at Udinese, and Bentley got a red card, and it showed that lack of discipline. Yeah, chairmen don't like that. You tested my memory then. I can't just remember covering the game.
There's been so many managers, as you're aware, in terms of that have lost their position at Spurs. I think
it's almost like when you lose that discipline and you lose the dressing room, then you can really feel it. And I don't think Spurs. I don't think they're at that point. But I'm not sugarcoating it. I mean, when you have players that I see that I love watching, like Kulusevski and Sonny. I love watching him. I'd pay to watch him, and for my son to watch him because he loves them as well. And you're 13th, 14th in the league. You're down in the second, in the bottom half of the division. Then clearly you're not getting the best out of the squad that you can. So I'm not saying that it's great, but I don't think that they're completely, even though the results been bad, I don't think he's completely lost it. Lost the players. I mean, what they did at City shows that there is a good team in there.
Yeah, and we have to also remember, look, 7 days ago they beat Liverpool at home, the champions, and look again. That has obviously set Spurs up for a second leg. One final one on it, Mike, because we have got to move on. What would the tipping point be in your mind with regards to Ange's future? And I'll follow up on that very quickly. Is would you expect him to start next season as Spurs head coach?
I do. I think he will. Because of the fact that I don't think Europe is realistic, and I don't think relegation is realistic. That's why I'm not sure what the point would be. Does
it hinge on a cup win though? Because you've covered the club
they'll have a statue of him.
The reason why I ask you that is, Mike, you've covered the club for such a long time. Again, not to age you, that it just feels that for ENIC, I'm talking about ENIC now as a requirement, that European football is almost a must. So this would be a very interesting situation that if Tottenham, I say interesting, it would be a devastating situation. If Tottenham were to end the season without any form of European football, whether they would give Ange Postecoglou that third season.
And I think it would really depend on, like you say, the way it's going. They might sneak in the conference if they get it together, but there's a decent chance that they won't. And like I said, I think that feeling that they have, the kind of feeling around the club from April onwards, if they are playing for nothing, they could have silverware, but if they are playing for nothing, to see Archie Gray, to use his talents not just at centre back, see what a great footballer he can be in midfield. Bergvall kind of building on what we've seen in the last few weeks, getting some of the players kind of firing back. Maybe that might need a signing or two to just freshen everything up. I think that feeling that you have at the end of the season, and whether it's positive or not, will then determine what goes on next season. I think Ange has got a very good chance of being in charge next season.
Mike, thank you so much. We're going to move on from that part of the interrogation, and we are going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. We've got over 4,500 of you that are watching the show live. And thank you so much, as always, for your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. We appreciate it. It's a testing time. It's a time where many need therapy in terms of from a Tottenham perspective and a welfare check on Tottenham. We're here to save you. Don't worry, I'm joined by the wonderful football reporter journalist Mike McGrath, who's covered Tottenham for a very, very long time. That I'm sure he won't care to tell us how long it's been, far, far too long, but he's got a plethora of clubs that he covers. So the good thing for Mike is he hasn't got to focus all of his attention on Tottenham. The man gets a bit of a get out, which he's lucky. Us, we're stuck with him. Right. Let's discuss where we are in terms of this January transfer window. For our listeners and audio, we're 17 days into it. And I just think, you know what, when we cast our mind back, Mike, which is quite intriguing here, that both Mickey van der Ven and Christian Romero were injured on December the 8th. And what's that? December the 8th, you're looking at Sunday, December the 8th, that obviously game where they were brought back for Chelsea. Further to that, Ben Davison was injured 3 days after that. And I think it became, at that point, seismic to a lot of Tottenham fans that we were going to have to act in this upcoming January transfer window if the club was going to try and really give themselves the best possibility to have a good second half to the season. So here we are, 17 days into it for us as an audio. I'm chancing my luck here because I'm thinking, will they do a deal in the next 2.5 hours? That will mean I can say it's the 16th of January. Maybe it's highly unlikely. You might tell me otherwise. It just feels that behind the scenes, Ange is saying the club is working hard, but it's not easy. That's an expression that's been used by him on a number of pressers really in these last 4, 5, 6 weeks. And I'm just wondering, how surprised are you that the club have only brought in Antonio Kinsky, who, to be fair, the club, I think it's been very, again, well admitted by a lot of the British journalists on the circuit like you, Mike, that was a transfer that was actually brought forward and one that maybe should have been done last summer to this summer. So how surprised are you? We've touched upon the league form, the status of the decimation of the squad, that here we are, 16, 17 days into a transfer window and Tottenham are yet to bring in a player that is outside of an alternative goalkeeper.
I am relatively surprised. I thought heading into the window, I thought that Spurs would be active along with Man City. I was hearing that they were in the market for a centre-back and maybe a midfielder. So I expected them to be really, really quite busy, actually. And I'm sure they're working very hard on it. But you have seen that Man City have been the kind of leaders in the market in January. They've been negotiating for 3 players, and a couple of them in the centre-back area, which Spurs kind of desperately need. I think Kuzanov actually at Lens, Spurs scouted him, and I think them Newcastle City really did like him, and he's going to be an excellent player. And losing out to Man City, if you can call it losing out, I mean, Man City just moved very quickly and have got him. You can kind of see that. But there have been other players on the market. Wolves kind of in the same kind of looking for a centre back. They went for Agbadou from France as well. So there have been ones on the market. I've been relatively surprised, that Spurs haven't moved quicker. I think you're in that situation which Pep Guardiola has kind of talked about when they were looking at Kuzanov is, right, we need a player for 6 months for sure, but we don't. If we're going to invest our money, we want a player to be here for 4 years, 4 or 5 years, the best years of his career, not just for 6 months.
Yeah.
And so that's why Kuzanov was so kind of it was so appealing to players. So I have been pretty surprised. I can see it go to the wire again with Spurs. I really can. I can see it. We've had a couple of windows.
Mike, do you remember the Pedro Porro signing where that took us to? Do you remember that?
Yeah,
we got dragged. Well, you got dragged and we got dragged right to the very, very end of that month, if you remember, when Conte was here. And all for that, when Conte was screaming out for Porro, he was sacked 2 months later.
I remember way back when I first started, when Van der Vaart was a last minute. They Spurs did last minute. Absolutely, they were the best of it. And I can actually see it happening this time, because just because these injuries just getting back at the end of January. I think they're going to see where they are. They're not the only ones, by the way. There are others. For instance, Brighton are waiting to see whether their forwards are going to be back, and then is he allowed out on loan? Things like that. I think Tottenham are not the only ones that are going to wait and wait and wait. And then I can see that it's going to be a mad weekend, by the way, because it's a Monday deadline and there's matches. Saturday,
I'll tell the wife now, Mike. Don't wait up. I mean, I just have to ask you this point. I mean, you've said there yourself that Tottenham aren't the only club that are going to operate like this. But I mean, I have to just say to a lot of the Tottenham fans out there will implore me to say this, that there's not a lot of clubs that have got the decimation of injuries that Tottenham have right now. And there's not a lot of clubs that sit 13th, 14th in the Premier League that need to act to try and resurrect the season. And in your own words, Mike, you said at the start of the show, give the squad a lift, give them some help. And I just wonder, we make that point that Anne just said on numerous occasions before the window opens, during the window is opened, these players, they need help. The constant rhetoric we're hearing is that the club is working very, very hard behind the scenes. And look, I'm not going to sit here and compare Spurs to Man City for 1 second, but I think, City are seeing their standards slipping. And despite already having a very talented squad, they're going out in this transfer window and they're putting money down to bring in players to put them in a better position for the second half of the season. I don't think any Tottenham fan is expecting Spurs to go out and spend absolute multi-millions on players. But I think what some fans would have liked to have seen is that, given what we already knew, when we take our mind back to December the 8th and you see Romero and Van der Ven go down and Ben Davies 3 days later, a bit of a plan from the football club, because we sat here with you 12 months ago. The club worked very hard to bring in Timo Werner. Again, I mean, that's a different discussion, probably what it was now to then in terms of what he's turned out to be. Dragoshin, the club beat Bayern Munich to his signing. It just felt that there was more intent in that window than the 12 months that we are now ahead. So is Ange Postecoglou, in your opinion, being backed, Mike? Do you feel he is being given the tools to get the most out of this season right now? Or do you feel, given the nature of our form, is the uncertainty over results and our position maybe leading to why the club are not moving early in this window?
Well, it's difficult to land players. It's really difficult. I think Dragusin was a lot of work. It was early on. It was done early, and I think with the injury situation, they knew they needed a centre back, and obviously, I think it's been sprung on them with the injury crisis, and I just don't think. I think that they and a lot of other clubs are just not going to spend money on somebody who is not up to the standard, or is a gamble from, say, the Championship, or even if you have a free agent, for instance, who's out there who's going to take 2, 3, 4 weeks to get up to speed in terms of doing a pre-season at the training ground. So I think it's a very difficult market for it. Is one, but they're in for them, but yeah, is he being backed? They haven't brought anybody in, have they? So he's not really been backed.
Goalkeeper. Yeah, the goalkeeper.
So
it's hard.
It is a difficult market.
Yeah, you say it's a difficult market there. I mean, look, you're very lucky, Mike, in terms of your role that you get to hear a lot in terms of on the circuit what Spurs might be looking for. If I had to maybe press you on what you feel the club would look to do in certain areas and positions, I know you mentioned a couple of areas there. You mentioned the centre back. I know fans are going to be imploring me to ask you, what about the forwards? What about the midfield? I mean, if I was to ask you to kind of put your money on it or gamble, what do you feel now between here and the rest of January? Do you feel is the priority positions the club will want to do to give Ange the best chance of the second half of the season, and of course give him the best opportunity to progress Tottenham in these respective cup competitions?
I do think a centre back, regardless of Romero and Van der Ven coming back, I think that's really important to have a commanding player there who is, who can compete basically and bring the best out of others, and to have 4 like that. If you had Van der Ven, Dragusin, and Romero, and another. I've always kind of considered Ben Davies as a left back myself, even though he plays centre. He's filled in, so I personally think that would really freshen it up. And I think a number 8, a midfielder, would also kind of. I just think, like I said, in that game against Arsenal, it just looked to me just a little bit flat. The balls that were lost, and I think Bissouma, perhaps Sarr, as very, very good players. I do think that they benefit from a bit of competition. Obviously, Bentancur at the moment is injured. I think they would benefit from just somebody in there, just at that same level, just pushing them a bit more, and then getting some performances out of either the signing themselves or their teammates.
Yeah.
You're probably going to try to say who, but I don't know who they're going to be signing. I'm trying to find out every single day.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's well acutely aware, as many journalists have told us on this show, that Johan Lang seems to keep his cards very, very, very close to his chest in the way he does operate in the market. I'm really intrigued to ask you this question, Mike, because obviously fans do get very excited when they hear that Fabio Paratici is still in amongst the walls at Hotspur Way and he's still pacing his way up and down on a match day. Does that in any way undermine the role of Johan Lange when you've got somebody in the consultancy role of Fabio Paratici that seems to still be acting in the interest of Tottenham on behalf of Daniel Levy? It's really intriguing to know how you understand the way in which Tottenham's transfer department team that work, and how Paratici does have an influence on that, if any at all, in your opinion.
Look, you hear that Paratici, if he's still in the picture and having the ear of Daniel Levy, I don't think it is a huge surprise that chairman would listen to people. You have chairman at every single club employ a technical director or a sporting director to conduct the transfers, but they're also people with their own contacts and that they lean on for advice. And so it's not a huge surprise if that relationship is carried on. Paratici didn't leave. I don't think it was. It's not like he was desperate to leave Spurs
No.
or Spurs desperate
No.
to let him go either. It was obviously it was circumstances beyond anybody's control because of the authorities putting down sanctions on him, which meant he couldn't continue. But I think you find that at all clubs. Does it undermine him? I think it can do if the sporting director is not being heard, then there's a problem, obviously, because then what's the point in having him? But if he is being heard and being listened to, and they're going ahead with his long-term plan, then I think it's a fairly normal relationship for a chairman to have kind of advisors or people that he speaks to professionally as well as kind of socially as well. Who's in his sphere. I think that happens at quite a lot of clubs.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talk about players that what Tottenham want and maybe that haven't come off. I mean, one player it feels Spurs have courted quite publicly during this January transfer that didn't end up coming off was that of Kolo Muani. And, that's one name that has escaped out of the bag really since the opening of the January window. And we understood Spurs to be quite interested in bringing the player to the football club. They obviously failed to convince him to join, who was eventually seduced, we understand, by Juventus manager Thiago Motta's speech. I mean, did you ever personally feel that Spurs had a chance of bringing that forward to the club, given maybe where Spurs are right now, Mike? And I mean, was it ever close to you for that move for Kolo Muani, despite a lot of reports suggesting Tottenham had very heavy interest?
I saw I didn't work on the story myself. It was around Christmas time, and a former colleague of mine, Charlie Wyatt, did a story on Spurs and their interest in Kolo Muani. And look, I mean, he played in a World Cup final, and there's clearly talent there. And when somebody's on the market like that, I don't think it'd be a huge surprise that Spurs would be looking at that and seeing if they could do something. I think Juventus is probably, is quite a huge draw for a player like that, even though they're not, having the greatest of seasons. I think it's a huge draw for them. Spurs being in the mix for that kind of deal. It kind of shows where Spurs are as well. They're ambitious.
Yeah,
I think United were looking at him as well. I don't think from what I understand, I never felt like I was never told like, oh, by the way, watch out for this guy's going to be arriving.
Watch out for Tottenham. Yeah.
But yeah, I could clearly see that he'd be a player of interest. They don't come around a lot. It's interesting who might be available on the back of that actually, and whether Vlahovic might be allowed out. And other Juventus things as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting deal.
Yeah, I think what Tottenham fans are most concerned about really is that it doesn't allow the other side of North London to start getting excited about maybe landing Vlahovic.
Yeah.
And we know he's a target for those at the moment. Look, as you are aware, Mike, Spurs have been linked with, as they always are, a plethora of centre forwards during the transfer window. One name that has been mentioned, which has gone a little bit quiet, because I think there's some interest in Germany now, is Marcus Rashford. Apparently, the reports indicate Spurs have maybe looked at whether a deal might be possible. I just don't see why Man United would want to do business with Tottenham, where I say both clubs are currently battling for rival positions. And I just will let the audience know, sorry guys, United have just moved above Tottenham in the Premier League, which means Spurs are currently now 14th. I can't believe I'm saying that, 14th in the Premier League. I mean, what is going on with our football club right now? 14th in the Premier League. There've also been names linked, Mike, the likes of Ivan Ferguson, who's also apparently been of an interest to the club, and Jonathan David. Look, I mean, we discussed about the fact Tottenham do keep their targets very, very close to their chest. I think you have been on here a couple of times and said there's been some interest in Jonathan David previously. And the fact that Ange has made it very, very clear that he wants to give Dominic Solanke some help. Would you imagine any of those kind of profiles will be the type of players that Tottenham will be looking to identify to bring to the club this window?
I think going through those players, I think Jonathan David's very kind of front line in terms of being the number 9. I think there is a lot of faith in Dominic Solanke being a long-term centre forward for Tottenham, and he's kind of shown why that is the case as well. I think he's having a good season actually, and there is a lot of potential there for him to grow at Spurs. With the others, with Rashford, I think he's been denied by the club, or I don't think Spurs are really kind of in that Spurs are saying no. Personally, this is not from information at all, but just personally, my feeling would be I think they'd be mad not to ask about it if he's available. But yeah, I kind of agree with you as well that I don't think United would be selling to a mid-table rival. Doing business with it, because it wouldn't be a sale, I don't think, initially. So I can see Rashford going abroad, to be fair. I can see that suiting all parties. But I would be pretty amazed if they didn't have a conversation about it, but I don't think it would happen. Ferguson's going to be really interesting. I touched upon it earlier in the season, earlier in the show. I think they're waiting on Danny Welbeck and how he's going to come back from injury, whether he will be back from injury. I think it's going to be really late in the window when they make a decision on that, and whether he'll be available for loan or not, and whether he'll be allowed out. I think there'll be a lot of teams in for him. Fulham like him. Potter's works with him at Brighton, and obviously would West Ham take him? Foreign clubs as well. Spurs are in that. They're definitely in the bracket of those clubs anyway. And if they do look for a forward, I mean, I rate him highly, and I think he would be quite good actually for a backup with Solanke, because to come on, you'd be hoping Spurs are progressing in competitions, and there'll be lots of games. That there would be plenty of games for him to play, and not just coming on for 5 minutes, because I do think Solanke is number one and will be for a good few years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we're going to be stuck in that Harry Kane conundrum again about the fact you've got a clear number one and you've got to try and find someone to supplement him. If you remember all those years, again, when you cover the club, they got Llorente in, to be fair. That was maybe one of the few that did end up at the time for a small period working. I mean, Spurs have always found that very tricky when having an almost established number 9 to then bring somebody in to either supplement them, complement them, work alongside them. I think you maybe have to go back to the time where Harry had the 4 strikers, if you remember, Keane, Defoe, Bent, if you remember at the time, Berbatov. I mean, I mean, under of course, you go back under Martin Yole as well. I mean, it is mad to think that, you look back at those times where Tottenham were, again, a club that were finishing maybe around top 5, top 6. We had 4 strikers available, and now we're in a situation where we find it very hard to even get a couple there. But Richarlison is coming back as well. I suppose, just to stick on Richarlison for a second, Mike, the player himself did actually publicly shut down any chance of a move in the summer, as we remember. He did say he doesn't want to move to Saudi. And, I think we can all agree with Richarlison that the problem with him is just trying to keep him fit. I mean, would you be surprised if come the end of the season Tottenham were looking to try and offload him? What do you think his future does hold for Tottenham, Richarlison?
It's always been the interest has always been there with Richarlison, and he's a Brazil. He was Brazil's number 9. For the last tournament, he is a huge talent who we haven't seen recently, and still a crowd favourite even at Everton for what he did, and like the attitude and how he carries himself. I think, but I kind of always just personally, like, I've covered the story about the interest in Saudi. I always kind of just thought in the back of my head anyway that he would end up there, to be honest. One final contract at his age, to which would be huge. Obviously, he'd be a huge star out there. That was my feeling on it. But obviously, the time has to be right for him.
Yeah, listen, maybe one to keep an eye on. Moving away from some of the forward players. I mean, you're probably acutely aware that in the summer, there was a massive cry for Spurs to go and sign the term the kids use, a monster number 6. And what we heard in the summer, there was rave reviews about what Archie Gray was doing behind the scenes at Tottenham in terms of him being that next number 6 for Tottenham. The most crazy, bizarre thing is that Archie has played almost every position bar the one we're all waiting to see him play, which is that number 6 role. And I'm sure, again, you'll be acutely aware there's been links to other midfielders during this January transfer window. They include the likes, if we go through the likes of David Fratesi at Inter Milan. There's been this link to Johnny Cardoso where Spurs are understood to hold a first option on the player, whatever that means these days in terms of the first option. And there's also been some links as well to Douglas Luiz. You did mention, Mike, that you maybe expect Spurs to go to the wire in terms of this window. Do you feel maybe that midfield area is one that Spurs may look and revisit towards the end of the window, depending on the likes of Douglas Luiz, if they can maybe get him out of Juve? What's your thoughts on that for you?
Yeah, they are the interesting ones on them for me is Cardoso, because I think they actually paid for that option, like nominal money, but still to actually kind of have that option, to invest in just to have the option shows that they rate him very, very highly. So that's a real player of interest. I haven't seen him play. I don't know whether he's at that level of, where everybody wants a Rodri, obviously, or the next Rodri. So that is for me, that'd be a really interesting one. What were the other two as well? Sorry, Ricky.
Absolutely fine. There's the likes of David Fratesi at Inter, which has been linked by a lot of Italian sources. You might not be surprised to hear. Maybe it's Fabio in the background that is moving some plates around there. And Douglas Luiz at Juve, another player.
I'm sorry. Yeah, look. Douglas Luiz is available, and whether he's got strong links, or his kind of agency's got strong links with Nottingham Forest, whether he might move there. But I definitely think that I think there's a good chance that he could be back in the Premier League. I think when Aston Villa sold, it was like a PSR thing. It sorted a lot of problems for them with PSR for him to get. He was a very key player for them. Now available, I think he's a good option, a really good option for a club. Douglas Luiz, who would do something for 6 months, fairly low risk in terms of investment. I don't know whether Spurs are looking at that or not, but I think that is one that that clubs should be looking at.
Maybe one to keep an eye on between now and the window, Mike, given maybe the nature of that player's future.
Yeah, I definitely think so. That it would be really interesting to see where he ends up. It doesn't look like he's going to stay at Juventus. Kind of similar situation with kind of Weston McKennie in that team as well. So I think that's one to look out for and to see if there is any interest from Spurs at all.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the fact for you, Mike, that you feel the club will look to potentially identify a centre-back between now and the end of the window. Look, there's some obviously talented centre-backs that are out there that apparently Spurs have courted and admired. There's the likes of Thomas Christensen that apparently Spurs have got an eye on. There's Ko Itakura, who's been mentioned. I mean, there's a different form of defender, you'd argue, more of a winger in Patrick Dorgu, who, to be fair, would be a great, I think, alternative to someone like Destiny Udogie. Destiny's played so many minutes for Tottenham this season. Both the fullbacks have really, him and Porro, I think they've played the most outside of Vicario before he got injured. Is that unrealistic to look at a player like Dorgu? And do you look at maybe the likes of Christensen and Itakura and maybe look at those guys and think, towards the end of the window, if Spurs are looking at centre-backs, they could potentially be options they turn to?
I think that is a really difficult market for them. I'm not hearing that Spurs at this moment in time are really close on a centre-back. I'm sure that they'll have targets from across Europe that are gettable, available, but it is extremely difficult because when you look at say you look at the Premier League, you look at who is available, it's people that are not in the team, basically. It's very difficult to get somebody who's playing really, really well in January. I think that's where Spurs have a problem in terms of getting somebody who is ready for now, like Kusanov.
Yeah, I mean, look, one player I do want to ask you about is Heung-Min Son. You, I think, at one point exclusively broke last week that Spurs had triggered that option to extend his contract by a further 12 months. And look, I think it's fair to say that at the moment with Sonny, we're not seeing the best Heung-Min Son that we've seen in a Tottenham shirt that we know he's capable of. There's a lot of speculation around West of why that is. Has he been overplayed? Are we just not seeing a system that's benefiting him right now? Is there more something personal going on behind the scenes of Sonny? I mean, there has also been reports, Mike, I'm not sure if you're acutely aware of this, that the player was hoping to negotiate a fresh, longer-term deal with Tottenham, but reportedly those talks never took place. And look, we understand, obviously, Spurs had to take that trigger option. Otherwise, it would have meant the player had the opportunity to start to speak to, obviously, foreign clubs from now. What do you understand the status of Heung-Min Son? Do you feel he would have liked a long-term contract? That could still happen, of course, but is it, again, no surprise to you that it's just a trigger at this stage?
Look, that was one that I was working on for the past couple of months, hearing that they were going to trigger it, and then I did hear when it happened, which was something that we covered at the Telegraph. I haven't heard of any talks of a longer deal at all. But obviously, players want security and players want to maximise their value as well. So it will, he's got until 2026, and then I'm sure his next move, whether it's to stay at Spurs or to go elsewhere, will be lucrative for him as well because of what he's achieved in the last in the last decade. It will be now at Spurs. I think from what I see that he has done in the 9 years, and it will be 10 next year, that he probably really deserves a lot of respect in terms of whether he wants to carry on as well. I just think he's an incredible player.
Yep.
Are we seeing the best of him? We see the technique of that when he scored at the Emirates Stadium just 24 hours ago is obviously still there. I do think also that players at his age might have to adapt in the same way great Premier League players like Wayne Rooney adapted and changed their game slightly to fit just being just a little bit older and not having that absolute explosive pace that he had when he was 24 years old. That's natural, and I see a really intelligent footballer who is able to do that, and I would say that he would probably he could be a playmaker as a number 10. He doesn't just have to be about pace because he is, with the attributes that he's got. I still think that that they can get the best out of him in a different way, and then he's definitely here for another 18 months, isn't he? And then we'll see. We'll see after that.
Yeah, like I say, I think with Sonny, there's obviously, as you know, he's adored by a majority of the Spurs fan base, Mike. Again, there'd be some that would allow Sonny to choose when he wants to leave the football club by his own admission. And like I say, with all supporters, there'd be some that would be maybe hastening, quicking up that exit. That's just the way football works. We'll keep obviously an eye on Sonny and how that does pan out. Quite interestingly, when we talk about players that are out of contract or coming out of contract, the Spurs have got 3 players that they're going to have to, make a decision on this coming summer for sure. They've got Ben Davies, they've got Sergio Reguilon, and they've got Fraser Forster that are currently in the last 6 months of their contract. Now, we've had an understanding on the show that we believe that similar to Heung-Min Son, Ben Davies has got an option which would allow Tottenham to trigger his contract for a further 12 months. I'd be keen to know that's something you understand as well, and whether you feel if that is the case, Tottenham will take up that option to, I think, extend Ben's contract for what would be, I think, the 11th season at the football club.
I haven't actually asked on that, so I don't actually know whether he does or not. But he would if he was free, I would I had some Leeds fans that I talked to who were asking about him actually, and I don't think he's moving to Leeds, by the way, in the summer. But I can definitely see a promoted club looking at Ben Davies if he was free. I think he's an excellent professional and really positive for the squad. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that if there was an option on his contract, that Spurs would take it. Forster, I could see with what he did kind of in December since the injury. Since the injury to Vicario, I could actually see him earning another year through loyalty. Being a number 2 or number 3 would suit everybody. I think I believe he's homegrown, isn't he? He's kind of played for England, so he's an asset in that respect. So I could see him start. I can't remember the other player that's
they've got Austin there as well at the moment. Obviously,
yes,
a great debut against Newcastle. I mean, there will be that clamour now. Thinking, Mike, on that point, that bearing in mind we've seen Vicario Kinski in that very impressive display from Austin, there will be some thinking it'll be great to see this kid maybe again be given the opportunity to be Spurs' third goalkeeper, and maybe Fraser have the opportunity to maybe move on from the club. Look, again, I think. He actually equipped himself very well in the first couple of games. It obviously became very apparent that it became too much for him towards the latter stages of the games he was playing in. I mean, I know he's nicknamed the tree, and the branches just simply fell off towards the end of those last few games Mikey was playing in.
I just wonder though that filling in like he did and whether he as a number 3, I think, if Austin was to go out on loan, which happens with young players, whether Forster would be a good number 3, and whether he's actually done enough. However, he made some mistakes, obviously, but kind of be on call for Spurs like he was in their time of need, that might just earn him just one more year as a number 3.
Yeah, listen, we shall see. We have obviously got some links with around the fact that Will Lancashire has already confirmed that if there's an opportunity for a loan, they'll try and find Will Lancashire a loan during, of course, this January transfer window. Min-hyuk's an interesting one, Mike, because again, there's, given Tottenham's form right now, I think everybody feels the club need a lift, and what better way is it to maybe give someone a debut to see what this kid is capable about? Do you just feel with Yang? I mean, Anne just spoke about giving the kid a period of really adaptation to a new country, new teammates, new culture, new way of life. Do you think his debut is far off? Because he was on the bench, I want to say, for the Liverpool game in the Carabao Cup. He was then left out of the squad against Tamworth. And then I don't believe he was. I'm just double checking. I don't believe he wasn't also on the bench for the North London derby. So do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, when is the right fixture for someone like Yang? Is there a right fixture given Tottenham's current predicament right now in terms of league results?
I think with Richarlison coming back in like a similar position, I just wonder whether it might. I would imagine a lot of Championship clubs would be saying, "Let's try and get him. Let's try and change our season."
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
I could see a couple of offers coming in for him. He's a very, very talented player. And with Lancashire, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong. I believe he's never been loaned out, and I think he will have so far in his career, and I think there'll be a huge amount of interest in him for the Championship to get him on board. There's a lot of injuries in the Championship, and a lot of people trying to just give that final push to get into the playoffs or to get into the automatic places. And I think he would be of interest. There might well be plans for him to play at a higher level, but I could definitely see some Championship teams bidding for him.
Yeah. Mike, this is the question that we always have to ask you, and it means when I tell you this question, the interrogation is coming towards an end, so you can smile now. You've already said that you maybe anticipate this window to go to the wire for Spurs right now. I can tell you that's not your fault. That does make a lot of Tottenham fans very unhappy right now, where given that United results, Spurs have now dropped to 14th in the Premier League. I didn't pick you up on it earlier, but when you said Tottenham and Man United are in a mid-table battle, I had to almost pinch myself and think, God, what league are we? What was it turned into, this league that we're in, Mike? And we mentioned a point there, 11 points off the top place in the top 6 there, close to the relegation zone, then the top 4. I think the worry for a lot of fans is that it just feels that the ownership right now doesn't seem to want to push on. I mean, look, you've covered Tottenham for a very, very long time. Have you ever known a period like this, Mike, where the ownership is unpopular as it is right now?
I'd have to say that they've never really been that popular.
No, I mean that's a very fair point. Thank you for correcting me. But I mean, have you ever known a situation like this where it does feel that what I would say is I feel like there's a massive majority of Tottenham fans right now that just feel there's a need for a significant change at the top. And it just feels at the moment that on board level, the club's priorities in terms of football doesn't seem to be there at the moment. There seems to be a lot more emphasis off the pitch than on it right now.
Yeah, look, there's always been a huge tension, hasn't there? From whenever I've spoken, whenever I've covered the club to now, that there has been a tension between the fans and Daniel Levy and what is right for the club. I think he's done a lot of things very, very well, and there's been some things which have really not pleased fans at all. I think that there could be, this could be a memorable season still.
Yeah.
I think that they could. I think if they do get it right in the next 2 weeks of the window, I think they could give it a bit of a lift and just change that mood completely. I think Levy, Daniel Levy, he doesn't matter whether Spurs are kind of in a new stadium or in the Champions League or the conference or not in Europe at all. I think there's always that tension there, and it's interesting to see where that pressure will lead to, whether it will lead to a change of managers or a change of the squad or whatever it is. It's so far in my lifetime covering Spurs has not led to a change in the chairman, who has always been there and will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, well, I think that's the one common denominator, Mike. They seem to change a lot of the staff internally, yet the one current constant at Tottenham is definitely Daniel Levy, who, for the 148th chance, will then get the next opportunity to select the next manager of the merry-go-round. It's a very interesting football club that we are so beloved to have. I thank my father for choosing me to be a Tottenham fan. Just to be very, very clear, I didn't have any choice in the matter. Just to be very, very clear. If I did, God, but I wouldn't have been allowed to live in my household. So there you go. Thanks, Dad. Love you lots. Let's end on this question, Mike. $1 million one. How many players do you think I know on 2 very quick questions, if you don't mind. How many players do you think Tottenham are going to sign between now and the end of the window? If I had to get you to nail your colours to the mask. And just to let you know, Mike, they'll never remember when you come back to us in the summer. They'll never remember.
Please don't hold me to it, but I do think they'll get 2. I think they'll get 2, freshen it up, and get a defender in the midfielders, freshen it up. And this is where Langer kind of earns his corn, doesn't it, to get the right players in. I do think that they need it, and that that hopefully they'll get a couple in.
Amazing, Mike. Final one for you: can Tottenham win a trophy this season? Will they win a trophy this season? That's 2 parts, isn't it? I've done you up there. Can they? Will they? Will they? What do you reckon, Mike?
Yeah, they can. They can. Of course, they can. I think they've got big performances in them, and if you can get a 0-0 at Anfield, and then
add POSTECOGLOU clean sheet at Anfield, Mike. Whatever you're going to be drinking, I want some of the same, please.
Anything can happen at Wembley, as we know. But I think that will be the test of Ange as well, to put a team together, to play in the right way at Anfield, to play in a winning way, and that winning mentality to get get a result there. It's not impossible.
Listen, Mike, from your mouth, who knows where that may take us. I want to say a massive thank you, Mike. I've had the pleasure of having you join us in the last 3-4 transfer winners with Tottenham. I know it's never easy, and it does feel that Tottenham, more than a lot of clubs, do love taking things right till the very, very last day. We've had our warning. It could be coming again. For that reason, Mike, where can all the Spurs fans find you? I know you are going to at this time, and it's the busiest time of the year for all of you wonderful guys that are on the circuit, that it's abnormal hours, just an abnormal culture of life at the moment when it's the summer and the January transfer windows. Where can we find you for all the very, very latest news on our beloved club? And more importantly, what you do for the football community, Mike? Where can we find you?
Yeah, so all our work goes at the Telegraph website. Some great reporters there doing Spurs. Not only myself, Matt Law, Sam Wallace, Jason Burr. We all try and get Tottenham news and news from everywhere else as well. My personal Twitter is @McGrath where my work gets published as well.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. We implore, look, there's nearly over 5,000 Tottenham fans that are watching the show live. We implore you, keep checking on Mike's notifications. He'll bring us the very, very latest Tottenham news. Like I say, he did break us that big news about Dragushin last January. So Tottenham do business. They do. It's a case of waiting and wishing and seeing. I want to say a massive thank you. Mike, thank you so much. An absolute pleasure. We look forward to seeing you in the summer for more things Tottenham. Hopefully, we're in a better place and we're talking to you as a trophy winner. Wouldn't that be lovely after 17, 18 years? And we'll be a lot happier. We will be for sure. But for myself and the wonderful Mike McGrath, we've been the last one on Spurs. Keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on you Spurs.